So Deathbed Dan is basically, it's a concept that if I'm sat here right now and I think ahead to myself on my deathbed, so say I'm, conservatively 70, 80, whatever I make it to, is he going to look back on what I'm doing now and be unhappy with how I've approached today? Like, am I going to be glad for the energy I've put in today? How is that going to reflect on Deathbed Dan?
Hello and welcome to The Writer's Mindset with me, Christina Adams.
And me, Ellie Betts.
Each week, we're here to bring you the strategies and advice you need to achieve your writing goals.
This week, we're talking to Daniel Wilcocks about self-publishing and the horror genre. You just couldn't help yourself, could you?
Nope.
Our interviewee this week is Daniel Wilcocks. He is an international best-selling author and award-nominated podcaster of dark fiction. He is also an author coach, 1/5 of the digital story studio Hawk and Cleaver, co-founder of the iTunes-busting fiction podcast The Other Stories, CEO of horror imprint Devil's Rock Publishing, and the co-host of the Next Level Authors podcast.
I sat down with him to talk all about self-publishing 101.
And to talk about reading and writing horror.
That too. I'm new to the genre and it fascinates me, so I couldn't help it. Because when I grew up, horror was all about just blood and gore and slasher horror. But actually now there's much more of a resurgence of the kind of more fantastical stuff, the supernatural stuff, the more psychological stuff. And that's more the kind of thing that I enjoy. So he recommended some books that I could check out.
Fantastic. I love the fantasy stuff in particular. But the psychological things that really mess with your head, that's what gets me. That's what makes me sleep with the light on.
Gotta admit, ghost horror used to do it for me. I was terrified after watching The Woman in White, and nowadays, like, I can watch stuff like The Conjuring and The Haunting Anthology, and it doesn't bother me.
That's good. It helps to have a Westie, I think. She will alert you to anything. She was always on guard mode. You'll be fine.
You say that. Something really creepy happened a couple of weeks ago. She was in here with me and just staring at my book, where the books are there behind me.
No.
Just staring at them as if like she was watching something.
Very creepy. Frankie keeps doing that here. He won't protect me, but he just keeps staring at things, and I think he's made friends with the ghost now, so it's cool. I'm not jealous.
Have you named the ghost?
No, I don't know. Maybe I should name the ghost.
Have you named the skeleton behind you?
Not yet. We have on the Facebook group a thread going with some name suggestions, so I just need to put them all in a hat and pick one out.
Yeah, maybe you could do like a live in the group and pick them all out.
Yes, and get everyone to come join us.
Yeah.
And pick them out and name the skeleton. And maybe the ghost will turn up and join us on the live. You never know.
Now there's a creepy thought.
The ghost will get jealous that we haven't named him. I don't know why it's a him. I don't know. Could be a her. Who knows? Either way, like, I was really freaked out the other day when I just stood in the bathroom and watched my bedroom door open. Like, shit's getting real.
Well, as soon as like people start talking like ghosts, my brain goes, what's the logical explanation for this?
Yeah, me too. But anyway.
If you find this episode and our others enlightening or valuable, you can support The Writer's Mindset over on Patreon. There you'll get early access to episodes like 3 or 4 weeks before they go live, bonus content, and our undying gratitude for supporting all the work that goes into creating these episodes for you.
That's right. And you can become a podcast patron for as little as £1. That's about $1.50 per month. To find out more, visit patreon.com/writers mindset.
Before we delve into personal updates, I want to do a podcast update first.
Oh, podcast update.
You know everything.
Yeah, I'm still excited to share it with everyone.
So this has actually been our best month ever, and we're recording this on the 31st of July 2021, and we haven't even started interview season yet, and yeah, it's just pretty mad how many downloads we've had this month. We released the trailer for season 3 yesterday, and that's had loads of really lovely comments and done really well. And yeah, we've almost doubled listens this month compared to all of our other months. And obviously the day isn't even over
I'm
yet.
so impressed. It blows my mind that there are so many lovely writers out there who listen to us ramble on about shit every week and seem to like it. I love it. It's so nice. And connecting with them on the Facebook group in particular has been amazing recently, and getting to know some of them. So yeah, just know if you're listening, we appreciate it. We see that you're listening, not you specifically, but you know, and it makes us very happy. It makes us very happy.
And we promise we're not actually watching you like Big Brother. That's just how Ellie made it sound.
I didn't mean to say that. We're not watching you, but we watch the numbers. You know, we don't know who all these people are, unless they come and talk to us in the group, which they're welcome to do. But we see that there's people listening, and even though it's just a number, it makes recording the episodes feel that little bit less lonely, doesn't it? Because you don't see the impact of recording the episode fully, I don't think, but seeing the numbers and connecting with people in the group and stuff, it starts to hit home that people are actually listening and they do actually like this. So it's nice. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside.
But back on track. Personal updates. Do you want to start this week, Ellie?
I can start this week, although my personal updates aren't very exciting because I've just been working really hard and finishing my projects. So for anyone who saw the accountability thread in the Facebook group, I have been working on 2 projects at the moment. One is my dissertation, and one is beta reading a book for a certain someone who shall not be named. And I am on track, and I am coming to the end of both of those projects at the end of the month as planned. So it feels weird to say that I'm being productive and actually getting them done, but I'm very happy to say that I'm being productive and getting them done. What have you been doing this week?
I haven't done much this week, to be honest. I've had a lot going on, but I did write one of the kind of pivotal scenes for the Necromancer's Secret, which was quite nice, and I came up with a very significant weapon that shall be used in future books. Yes, it will be that kind of thing. But yeah, I won't say why. I'll
Don't say any spoilers, but I already kind of know a bit about it, and it's really good.
Thank you. The other thing is I decided to convert Hollywood Heartbreak into EPUB so that I could read it through on my tablet. And I always do that with books because it makes you feel more like a reader. But for me also, I find it easier to see the full story because Scrivener can be quite compartmentalized, and I like that for writing. But when trying to edit and things, I just prefer to read it. I know a lot of people print stuff out. I don't like wasting that much paper. I'd rather do it in a more eco-friendly way. So that's why I put it on my tablet, and also my notes then sync through to my laptop. And my plan last night was to convert it and then put it on my tablet and read like two chapters while I was in the bath. I ended up spending 2 hours in the bath and reading 19 chapters and coming out resembling a prune.
A very relaxed and well-soaked prune, though, so that's good.
Yeah, that's true. It definitely did help me relax, and I find it a lot easier to concentrate on books when I'm in the bath because there are no distractions. I don't take my phone or anything in there, so there are no devices. There are no other screens for me to look at. It's literally me, really warm water that eases my joints, and then a book. So I actually get most of my reading done in the bath, which is probably bad because then I don't read as often as I could.
You're just going to have to start going for a bath 2 or 3 times a day.
My hair would hate me for that.
And probably your water bill.
Already. Yeah, true. That's true. Yeah, because we've got a water meter as well, so we do get charged more depending on how much we use. That's not a good idea.
And Millie would get sad because she can't have snuggles.
That's true. She doesn't like coming into the bathroom generally either. So she has tried to get into my bath once or twice though.
Yeah, I can see her doing that. Yeah.
And I think she drank the bath.
Of course.
Yeah, she likes the taste of shampoo. She's a weird one.
Yeah.
Shall we go catch up with Daniel?
Absolutely. We should catch up with Daniel because there's a lot to go through.
Today, I am joined by Daniel Wilcocks. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh God, the prep. So I am an independent author. I have been published since 2015. I was lucky enough to go full-time with my author business in 2019. I am an international best-selling author. I am an award-nominated podcaster and co-founder of the Other Stories podcast, which is 20-minute horror fiction that comes out every single Monday. I am the CEO and owner of Devil's Rock Publishing, and I'm also the co-host of the Next Level Author podcast with Sasha Black.
Very nice. And
nice,
you recently...
succinct way of saying it.
Yeah, I like it. You've recently published a book called The Self-Publishing Blueprint.
Yes.
So obviously that's a guide to how to get started self-publishing. But what would you say are the biggest mistakes you see indie authors make? And are there any differences depending on if someone's at the start or in the middle or further along in their career?
Yeah, sure. I think to answer the second point first, yes, 100%. I think the obstacles and the challenges that you face when you're first publishing your book is very different to, 3-4 years down the line after you've published a few different books. But I'd say that one of the biggest mistakes, so if we split this into sort of beginners and, quote, more advanced, take that how you will. For beginners, I think number one is a lot of people tend to pin the success of their first book as a marker for their success as a writer forever. And it's something that really, really frustrates me. And I get it because there's no rule book to how to write. Nobody really teaches you the actual creative art of writing. And so people tend to, say, let's just pick an avatar. You've got someone who's in their 40s and they've decided they want to write a book, but they've been wanting to do this for like 15 years. Are they a good writer? So they write the book, they put the book out, and then it's not met with the success that they'd like because it's your first book. And if you're independently publishing, you have to build an audience. You have to learn all these marketing skills and everything else to actually get your book into readers' hands. And so a lot of people, like 95% of people, will put out that book. It won't hit the readers that they want to, and then they'll just quit and say, "Oh, I can't write." That's clearly an indication of my skill as a writer. And on some level, that's right because you're still a young writer in that sense. But the number one thing that is preached in independent publishing, but should probably be magnified a bit more, is just this exponential growth of putting books out, building up a backlist, using more products to bring people into your funnel. And really, most self-published authors don't hit real success until they've got a number of books behind them. What that number is sort of varies depending on your tactics and your gusto as a writer. But that's definitely one of them, is a lot of people who will just quit at that stage. It's really, really sad to see because there are some fantastic writers out there that just don't get that recognition straight away. And the other thing for beginners as well is finding the right stage to let go of their book to give to readers. So you're laughing. I'm guessing this might sound familiar.
Yeah, we had a phrase during my MA, which was that a piece is never finished, it's abandoned.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, that rings true for me for every single thing I've ever finished.
Yeah. And I think that really you can, again, there's no rule book to how to sit down and begin a career in writing. And a lot of people have to spend months by themselves in a room writing that book. And you get into your head, you wonder whether you're good enough. And the only way to find out if you are, quote, good enough is to give it to readers or to give it to someone other than you. My argument would be make sure you're actually giving it to people who read what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to your next door neighbor or a family member. Really try and find the right person to read your book, because that could make or break someone. But just knowing that point where I've worked, because I coach authors as well, and I've worked with a lot of authors who have had their first book in progress for 10 years, and that's no exaggeration. And no one's ever read it. And they wonder if they're good. And I'm like, there's only one way to find that out, and that's to give it to someone and to get that feedback. So finding the way that works for you, in which you feel comfortable and you can receive that feedback, will definitely push you forward. And then a couple of very quick ones for people who are maybe a bit further into their writing career. One mistake that I've certainly made, and when I say mistake, it's kind of 50-50, is genre switching. So I've jumped into a lot of different genres, and the people that tend to find the quickest path to success are the people that stick consistently to a genre, deliver to their readers, and build that reader base so that those readers consistently know what to expect. I've jumped into post-apoc, into horror, into a little bit of sci-fi as well, and it's only now that I'm kind of really honing down and going, okay, horror, this is the audience I'm building. But also, for me, it was a journey, and I'm quite happy I took that journey because it allowed me to experiment, to find out where I wanted to call home. So it's not always the worst thing, but people need to understand it can slow down your progress as an author. Another one is looking after your actual reader base. So a lot of people spend a lot of time audience building and putting out Facebook ads and recruiting new readers, but not doing a whole lot to really delight and engage the readers they already have. And it's so much easier to keep current readers than it is to recruit new readers. So the more you can look after your current audience, the stronger your fan base will be and the easier it will be to grow. And then the final one is one I'm very, very guilty of a lot of the time, is forgetting to market your backlist. So forgetting that those books that you spent months, years
Yep.
putting out before, you just forget about it, you just leave, and then you're focusing on the current book. So really trying to get that entire backlist to work and creating an ecosystem where you're marketing everything so that it works for you as one.
Going back to people who are afraid to share that book they've been tinkering with forever, even though that's the only way they can find out if it's any good, what would you say to someone who is absolutely cacking it at the thought of sharing their book with, their dog, let alone an actual beta reader or an editor? How would you help them with that?
It's difficult because obviously it's dependent on the type of person it is. But if you are really, really bricking it, ultimately that may just be your biggest hurdle. So if you can overcome that hurdle, everything gets a bit easier from there. But also, a lot of why people are afraid to put their stuff out there is just writing to a lot of people can be really precious. It can be a thing so personal that it's, for a lot of people, their escape. So, you're out of control at work, wild at work, but you don't have a lot of control in the place that you work. You're looking for a place in which you can feel at home, in which you can really sort of, I really apologize. My laptop's the fan is going absolutely crazy. So if there's a humming in the background, that's my laptop.
Don't worry, I've been there. I've had it too.
It's awful. But yeah, it's something that's so personal. So like it's untouched and it's yours and it's pure. And the minute you give that to someone, it can dilute, it can change, the meaning of what it is that you create. And I think that understanding that for someone ultimately and having those conversations with people to say like, okay, what is it? Why what is it you're doing your writing for? And then looking at what their goal is. So if your goal is to publish your book, the inevitable step is to give it to someone. And I think that we, especially as first-time writers, think that in order to give it to someone, we have to perfect it as best we can. But really, most of the growth comes in identifying mistakes, identifying patterns. I run an online writers group, and we got a guy in there who made the really, really brave step before he'd even finished his first book, the first draft of. He gave 5,000 words to an editor to get feedback on and say like, okay, find my weak spots, tell me what I can extrapolate and put across the entire thing. And I think that's such a really good attitude to have because you're going to an editor who is a professional. You're allowing them a sneak peek so you can identify certain things that you can then work on and make your first draft stronger. And it's a step forward. It's a step in the right direction. And I think that it is hard, but it is an inevitable step that people just have to overcome if you want to get into this business. If maybe you get to that point and you're about to hand it off to someone and you think, oh, maybe I don't want this as strongly as I think I do, pull it back, keep it as yours, keep it as something special. You don't have to put your book out there, but for people that do want to get into this kind of life, that is something just to inevitably try and take gently, take the criticism with a pinch of salt, and then try and keep moving forward because everything can be fixed. I use this analogy a lot, and I don't know why because it's a crap analogy. But if I was to build a car from scratch now, I have no clue what I'd do. And the first car that I built would be crap, and it probably wouldn't start. That's your first draft. But then if I, showed that to an engineer or a mechanic and said, okay, what have I done wrong? They can show me the things. I'm obviously not going to get it right first time. I've never built a car in my life. And so the second time, it might start, it still might not. But you make those sort of small changes until you get to a point in which, you're comfortable, you're ready to publish it. But it is just about getting better over time and accepting that first draft is never going to be as nice as you want it at the end.
Yeah, and I think sometimes even your first book, when you look back on it, you might go, just what, why, what? And you almost, I hasten to say you're embarrassed by it, but you find it a little bit cringeworthy to go back through it. Yeah. There's this quote I always mention, and I paraphrase it badly, so I shouldn't quote it, but it's one of the big entrepreneurs. It's either Richard Branson or Bill Gates, someone of that ilk. And they said that if you can't look back on things you've done in the past and feel embarrassed, then you haven't grown enough.
Oh, 100%. I love that. Yeah, because I've actually been looking at my first novella again recently, because like I said, that came out in 2015, and that was the first thing that I really sort of put together that was of any real size. And I haven't read it in a couple of years, and I kind of want to go back to it and revamp it based off of what I've learned over the past 6 years. But then I'm in two minds over whether to do that, because number one, it could be a better product, but number two, it's a stamp of where I was in time, and I don't really want to alter something that started my career. So I'm not sure where to go with that at this point.
What are the minimum steps you'd recommend someone takes when launching any book, regardless of where it is in their kind of career?
Minimum steps. I mean, I think having a reader magnet in place is always number one fundamental to me. And actually, what I've started doing with newer authors is encouraging people to get the reader magnet before they finish the first book, because you can then leverage the reader magnet to be building an audience while you're then writing that first book, so that when you come to launching that book, you have at least a small group of people that are interested in buying the book, and you can start to build a bit more momentum. And because reader magnets tend to obviously be a bit smaller than your main novel, so I think I've got a couple that are about 7.5, 10,000 words. They're quicker writes, they're easier to put out there. They give people a flavor, a sample of the main book, and then, like I say, that gives you some boost so that when you actually do launch the main book, you've got some clout behind you. But I think in terms of the bare minimum, publish a book, but publish it well. Make sure you've got a decent cover that is, like you say, competitive among your genre. Make sure you've actually done your research into how to write a decent blurb. Again, they can vary depending on genre. There's very different ways to write a romance blurb than there is to write a post-apocalyptic blurb. Nail in your keywords. So you can use programs like Publisher Rocket to research your keywords, your categories, making sure that your book's positioned in the best place possible. Because that's another thing that a lot of people get, is that they'll put their book out and they'll suffer with negative reviews. And if you read the reviews carefully, most of the time it's just that you've given the book to the wrong audience. It's not that the book sucks. It's for example, this wasn't so much negative review, but just in terms of sales numbers. My latest series, When Winter Comes, I originally marketed that as a horror book with a post-apocalyptic lilt. And what I've realized is it's actually a post-apocalyptic book with a horror lilt. So I've got a new cover set up for that. I'm going to be doing some tweaks and bits and pieces, but it's finding exactly where your book should sit on the shelf so that the right readers find it. I'd say if you can, get some ads stacked up. So I tend to either soft launch a book and have it go live a couple of days before the actual release, so I can set up some ads, or I'll set it up for pre-order, so I've got a link that I can give to places like eReader News Today, Robin Reads, those kind of promotional sites. And then if you can, try and dabble with AMS, Facebook, BookBub ads, and see if you can get something rolling. See if you can, start that path to cost per click ads, which it's a bit more of an advanced game, I'd argue, but at the same time, it's good to kind of just put some stuff out and start wrapping your head around that. Obviously, telling all your audience, seeing if you can get some newsletter swaps with other people in your genre. And then the biggest thing you can do is move on to your next book.
Yeah, I think people forget that publishing the next one is also marketing the previous one. So it is in itself a form of marketing. So if people turn around and go, I hate marketing, actually, there's a very simple solution.
Yeah. Right. And I think a lot of people underestimate that, particularly now with how the entertainment industry is. If you look at like Netflix and Disney Plus and like all of these sort of streaming services, everything is quick, everything's rapid. People want to know that there's more content coming. So people will be much more hesitant to jump into a book one if there's no book two than they would jump into a book one if there are already 4 or 5 books out in that series, or if the series is complete, which is why a lot of box sets do so well, because readers jump in and they know that there's already the content there. They can get a full arc of the story, and usually it's better value as well. So definitely just jump onto that next book and get that out.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about mindset already, but what would you say are the biggest mindset issues you've seen writers face?
I think the main one that I face, so as I mentioned, I coach authors. I have sort of like one-on-one power hours. I have sort of like coaching programs and things. And most of the work that I seem to do is unpicking expectations around the one path to success. So an example of that is over the last, 3 or 4 years, maybe, the rapid release model has been very, very widely megaphoned across the self-publishing community. And for people unfamiliar with that model, that's essentially a model of, for example, you don't publish your first 3 books until you have them written. You publish one, a week or 2 later, you publish the next one, a week or 2 later, you publish the next one. And then you jump into a cycle of releasing a minimum really of once a month, just to play the algorithms, keep it going, and to feed readers so that they keep buying your product. And because that's worked so well for certain people, a lot of people have tried to replicate this. And I found that, I kind of am, I'm not one of those at the minute. I do write fast, but that's like a whole separate thing. But it's one of those things that it's not the only way to success. it's one way to success. And I've seen a lot of people who either have tried to make that happen and then realize that they don't write fast and therefore feel like they're failing because they're not able to keep up with these people that are like stacking books and making millions. Or even on the other side of that, I've worked with and around people who were rapid releases who have discovered that after a year or two, they can't keep up that pace anymore. And so it's the biggest mistake I see people making is thinking that there's this general path to success or these sort of routes that you have to take, not understanding that consistency, transparency, like building your brand in a way that is authentic and connects with the reader based on your genre is really sort of the only tried and true method to keep going forward. And whatever that looks like is different for different people, because me and you could write exactly the same types of books. We could have very, very similar, paths in life in terms of like our personal lives, our financial income, but we're both different people. So you might, for example, be really, really effective with Facebook ads, and I might be really, really good at, networking and going on podcasts and doing that. And so it's understanding that there's an entire pool of ways to be successful, and it's picking the tactics and the strategies that work best for you, which is really difficult to do when you're in a bubble and you're a writer and you're sat by yourself and the only interaction you have with other authors are on Facebook groups or in podcasts. It's really difficult for you to validate that the path you're on is right because there's no one confirming that it is. So joining communities, getting involved in things like that and trying to network with other authors is a really great way to overcome that as a barrier. And then the other one that I'd say in terms of mindset shifts is just acting like an author. There's no, it was really bizarre. I was going back through, because I ran a podcast in 2016 called The Story Studio with Luke Condor. And I went back to one of our earliest episodes and we started doing these little sort of like micro episodes of author advice. And the irony of this was hilarious. But one of the episodes was, it was me giving a lesson on at what point you can call yourself an author. Perfect. Bounces back to this. And I don't even think I believed my own advice that I gave then, but I 100% believe in the advice I was giving then now. And that's just to act like an author from the start. If you decided that you want to write a book, you're an author. Like, you don't need validation from your mum. You don't need validation from your husband, your friend, your sister, whoever. If you're happy to commit to it, if you want to write, if you're ready to learn and you're eager to just up your craft and listen to people, you're an author. And therefore you can act as such. Put that down as your Instagram profile. Like, nobody will ever get their sword and dob you an author. You just have to claim it for yourself. So just do it.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people preface the word author with things like beginner or
upcoming,
newbie.
soon.
Yeah, things like that. It's like, why do you need that differentiation there?
Yeah.
Because then you're almost saying, I'm not quite good enough for this title at the moment. Why aren't you good enough?
I've got a friend who's training to be a nutritionist, and she had that with hers because she's not quite qualified yet. She's like a few weeks off getting the qualification, but the amount of knowledge that she's acquired from her course means that she's already coaching people and giving them sessions. And she has a real bugbear with saying, I'm a nutritionist, because she hasn't yet got that piece of paper at the end of it. But the fact is she's giving nutritional advice to people, and therefore in taking on that role and acting as such, you are a nutritionist.
Yeah, it's exactly the same with being an author, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's also a distinction between writer and author. I see a lot of people put I'm a writer, and they'll only put I'm an author once they're holding a book in their hands.
Yeah,
I'll let people take that one as they will. I will tell people where to go on that one.
One of the things you said, I think I saw you have a video on Instagram about it. You said that showing up for yourself, even if no one else cares, is important for writers. Why is that?
Because we are the only people we can rely on when the lights are off and the room is dark. You can reach out to different author groups. You can, ask your family and your friends to hold you accountable. Ultimately, the only person that can make you do the work is you. So if, you could surround yourself in 50 of the greatest writers who are trying to motivate you and whatnot. But if you want to just stay in bed and sleep, that's what you're going to do. So it's just as simple as that, really. Like, the one lesson that I really, really learned early on in this career is that if I wanted to make it happen, I had to make it happen. And I was working a full-time job. I had a newborn son. He is still alive, thankfully. I've won that battle. But around that time, there was so much going on, and I only had these small pockets in the day to get work done. And that was when I'd write. I'd get up at 5:30, 6 in the morning. I'd write for half an hour to an hour in the morning. And if I didn't do that, I really, really felt the effects of it, because I'd know that because of me, I've delayed my progress in making my author career start. So even on the days in which it was hard, even on the days when I was tired, when there was 1,000 things to do, I showed up and I put in the work, and thankfully over time that's paid off. And I also found that, I can't remember, I definitely heard this on the podcast at some point around that time, because I was listening to a lot of podcasts to try and get me in the mindset of becoming an author and taking this kind of life. But whoever it was basically said that because I was working my 9 to 5, every day I'd show up to my job and I'd do the work, and I couldn't be too tired to do the work. I couldn't, make an excuse to just sit there and do nothing. So why am I putting all of that energy into a thing that I don't want to do? Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate my job. I enjoyed my job. But why would I invest that time and give my best to that job and then slump in the time that I had to myself? So I really took that to heart, and I really, took responsibility for the fact that if I wanted to write 5,000 words that week, I had to make that happen. Like, my fiance at the time, she couldn't do it. My mum couldn't do it. Like, it's just down to me. And I think that's the same for everyone. And something that I think people know, but they never really think about, is that if you want to do the thing, you have to put in the work to do the thing, and no one else is going to do that work for you, especially in something as personal as writing.
Yeah, no one's going to sit there and go, have you done any writing today? Have you hit that word count? No one's going to be there to motivate you every single day. It has to come from you.
No, absolutely. And it is really difficult. Don't get me wrong. Like, I get how hard it is to motivate yourself and push yourself to do that, especially if you're not in the habit, or, you've got the whole imposter syndrome of, oh, but I'm just like dabbling. Like, I'm not really a writer, that kind of thing. Just commit to it, give it a go, and just own it.
Yeah. What have you got to lose?
Mm-hmm.
Is that maybe a little bit of your energy?
Yes. But you can get more of that. That's what caffeine's
Exactly.
for.
Exactly. You mentioned that your superpower, and I really like this, is seeing through the bullshit. Why do you think that's helpful when you're coaching authors?
Because everyone comes to me with a problem that isn't the problem they think they have. And it's really interesting. I don't know where it comes from. In terms of like the Gallup strengths, and I don't know if people are familiar with these, but in terms of like the Gallup Clifton strengths, which is, it basically ranks your first out of 31 different strengths. It gives you a top 10, and it's basically, you should focus on those top 10 and magnifying those, as opposed to trying to like strengthen all your weaknesses so that you can really sort of become powerful. And one of my top ones is individualization, which is the ability to kind of recognize the individual in each person. And it's just fascinating because although everyone is an individual and you all have your own paths, and we've already kind of touched on this earlier in terms of like, marketing your book, there are commonalities that transcend all of that. So things like your personal health when it comes to finance, physical health, mental health, when it comes to your mindset around like how you approach different things. You've got your family life, you've got your work life, you've got your author life, you've got all these different factions. And people will come to me and say, for example, I'm really struggling to finish this book. And they'll think that it's because they're not putting in enough work. It's because they're not writing fast enough. It's all this kind of stuff. But then you pick it back and it could just be that they're going through a divorce in their personal life, and that's really creating a block for them because they've got other things that really need their attention in terms of your life. Like, writing isn't an isolated practice. It's part of a greater whole. It could just be that they're comparing themselves to someone else and they are writing as they should be, but they're not writing as fast as their buddy because their buddy writes much faster, and that's just part of their process. Could be that their friend plots and this person pants, and there are all these different sort of factors. And most of the time I'll sit there and I'll kind of ask people to give me an idea of what it is that the problem is, where they are, where they're writing, what they're trying to deal with. And 95% of the time it is a case of the actual problem that they're trying to solve is about 3 degrees to the left. And so I don't know where it comes from, but it is just, I think by listening and trying to understand this greater mechanism in which writing fits, you are able to understand or are able to identify where that pain point is and the real problem people are having. And most people just want to be heard. Most people, like I say, we live in these really sort of vacuous chambers when we write, in which we're in the room, we're by ourselves. Like even now, like I'm in the room talking to you online, but I'm in a room in a house that's miles away. And so we never have those real touch points, those interactions in which, someone else can say, oh, I'm feeling that too. Or, that's a normal part of the writing process. So it's, I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but it's sort of like just breaking down those barriers and really trying to find what it is they're saying amongst what they think they're trying to say.
Yeah, I get you, because I've seen the same thing. A lot of people say, oh, I'm having this problem. And then you look and it's like you say, because something's going on in their personal life, or maybe that's the wrong genre that they're writing in and they've never considered it, or maybe they don't know their characters well enough and they're blaming the plot. And it's all these little things that people have never considered. And that fresh perspective can make a massive difference in terms of overcoming that hurdle to actually finish something.
Yeah. One that I see very, very commonly, which I'll give as like a bonus tip from my book, is quite a lot of people skip that first step of researching the market when they're writing their first book, because the first book is a book that comes from the heart generally, or it comes from this, like, I've had this idea for 15 years and I want to put it into practice. And so they'll just jump straight into writing the book and writing the story that they think needs to be told. And then they'll realize at the end of it, they've got this story that is fantastic, but hasn't been shaped into a way to fit a certain genre and reach a certain pool of readers. So a lot of the time I get people come to me with that saying like, oh, it's not selling, or I don't know where this fits. And then we basically have to take that step back and go right back to the beginning and go, okay, well, who are your competitor authors? I don't know. Okay, what genre is this going to fit in? I think fantasy. All right, but what type of fantasy? And then it's all these questions that should have been asked, that haven't been asked, that then need to shape the book going forward. So if you're listening to this and you're a new author, or you're halfway through your first draft, my recommendation is pause and just really try and critically consider, does your book have the tropes of the genre you're trying to hit? Do you know where you want it in the charts to fit? All those kind of general position and market questions that will help you increase your chances of actually having a successful book launch when it comes to it.
Yeah, I definitely think when people are writing from the heart, they kind of begrudge the idea of doing that market research. But it's like, well, do you begrudge the market research, or do you begrudge your book not selling more? Which, are you always going to have that niggling in the back of your head? Oh, if I'd done this market research up front, would the book sell better? Would I be happier with the results, etc.? So it does save you a lot of time and hassle and stress if you just do that work up front, even if you don't want to.
100%. And you can still tell your story. You just have to look at a couple of little touch points along the way in which, you tick them off so the readers will be happy.
Yeah, and then if you've done the market research and you still decide you want to go against that, at least you've got that knowledge and you essentially know why the book didn't do as well as it could have. Because there will be some people who do that research. Yeah, because there will be some people who go like, look, I don't want to do this research. I don't want to do this genre trope. And then they're like, why is my book not selling? And it's still a very simple answer. But at least they're more aware of what that reason's likely to be.
Yes. And you can either go back and fix that book, or you can just move on to the next one and take the lessons that you've learned and then treat that as your first marketable commercial book.
Exactly. So there are lots of options there.
Loads.
Exactly. So let's dive into your writing process. How do you get focused during your writing sessions?
I tend to try and write at the same times every day. I'm much more of a morning writer than an evening writer, although that has changed over time, because when I was in my old day job, sometimes I had to write in the evening. You just do what you need to. But now that I've kind of got the luxury of a bit more time, I tend to try and get a lot of my creative work done in the morning, because that's just when my brain's more switched on and fresher. And then when it comes to actually writing, I work in Scrivener. So I approach the page. I have a quick look at what I did the day before if I need to, just to refresh my mind where it is. And then I have, for people watching on video, I have a big set of headphones that I shove on. I've got a Spotify playlist that I made myself, which is basically just full of sort of moody, atmospheric music. And then I've got a pair of glasses that I put on. And I just, most of the time, I'll set a timer for 20 minutes or so. And then I'll just close everything, focus for 20 minutes, do the work, and then surface for maybe 5-10 minutes, and then jump into the next sprint. And just keep repetitively going until I've hit the word counts that I'm after for that day. So it's very, it is very simple. And I do find that there is a coffee shop that's quite local that I tend to go to a lot, which I only ever go to that coffee shop to write, so that when I sit there, my body knows that's what I'm here for. Mentally, this is where I switch into writing mode and I just get stuff done. Because I do find that sometimes working at home, where I'm working on admin and marketing stuff as well, it can sometimes be a bit trickier just to get the wheels turning. But yeah, it's a lot of sort of just little tricks.
How do you deal with distractions when they come about? Like if your phone's relentlessly ringing, or someone wants your attention, or there's drilling outside because they're doing roadworks or something?
If it's nothing that's directly demanding my attention, I'm normally pretty good. So if there's sort of like background chatter or things, like I'm okay with that. I've actually discovered recently that I can listen to music that has lyrics while I write, which is strange for me. But it is interesting that you talk about distraction at the minute, because I'm in the process of looking for a new house. So I'm getting a lot of phone calls at the minute from housing agents and mortgage advisors and all these different things. And the answer to that, I guess, is if it's a call that I have to take, I don't deal with it well, because I very much like my time to go in the way that I want it to go. So that is quite a challenge at the minute. But then if it's Facebook, Instagram, social media, all that kind of stuff, I'm pretty good at just closing them down, because nothing is ever really that important. Nothing.
Yeah,
Nothing's ever really come up.
Yeah, if the house isn't on fire and no one needs hospital treatment, it can wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to, when I did my early mornings, I just wouldn't touch anything social. I wouldn't have my phone with me. I'd just sit at the computer and I'd just get the thing done. But yeah, it's just turning most of it off. And I know for some people that is hard. Like social media can be a real distraction. And I definitely go through phases where I let it slip and then I have to pull it back. But mostly, yeah, it's just shutting everything down and going, okay, this is the thing that I need to be doing right now.
Yeah, I'm terrible for social media. Although I do find when I'm doing writing, particularly when I'm writing fiction, I do close everything down, because I just can't concentrate with like my WhatsApp going off, or Facebook or Twitter or any of them. And I actually do listen to music with lyrics, and I didn't know people didn't.
Oh, really?
I've heard it more and more lately, but I've always listened to music with lyrics in. I find classical more distracting. I don't know why.
Interesting. But yeah, I think you just get used to what you get used to.
Yeah, it has to be stuff I've already listened to and that I'm familiar with. So I can almost blank it out because I know what the lyrics are and stuff. I'm not singing along. I'm not analyzing it because I've listened to it a gazillion times. But I have playlists for all of my characters, for different emotions, for different books. And that really helps me kind of channel the energy that I'm trying to channel into that particular scene or chapter.
Yeah, I do very similar. Although I'm the opposite in that respect, in that I can only listen to songs that I've not listened to before. Because if it's one that I know, I'm instantly like singing that or thinking about the lyrics in my head.
Yeah, for me, if it's new, it's the novelty of it. So I'm trying to listen to it and pick apart the lyrics and things. So I find it easier to listen to the new stuff, for instance, if I'm out with the dog, because then it doesn't really matter if I'm picking apart the lyrics, because it's not I'm having a conversation with a dog. Okay, sometimes I do. Every dog owner does it. It's not just me. They're good listeners. No, they're not. Millie's terrible. No. Anyway, you knew I was going to bring this up, so I've got to do it. You have this concept called Deathbed Dan. So can you tell us a little bit about Deathbed Dan and how it came about?
Deathbed Dan seems to be weirdly popular with people.
Because I think it's the alliterative name and the fact it's a really clever motivational tool.
Yeah, so I came across the concept a couple of years ago from Gary Vaynerchuk, who is a social media marketing sort of guru, does a lot of motivational talks and talks a lot about entrepreneurship and productivity. And it was something that really resonated with me, because so Deathbed Dan is basically, it's a concept that if I'm sat here right now and I think ahead to myself on my deathbed, so say I'm, conservatively 70, 80, whatever I make it to, is he going to look back on what I'm doing now and be unhappy with how I've approached today? Like, am I going to be glad for the energy I've put in today? How is that going to reflect on Deathbed Dan? And so if I do have a bit of a crummy day or my energy levels are a bit low, I do sit and think, okay, what's Deathbed Dan going to think about this? Am I working hard enough to make him proud? Like, is this a thing that matters to him? And I think that's the real important distinction here. What it's not is a tool to say, just keep working, just keep overworking. What it is a tool to really think and consider about the actions that you're taking now. So sometimes rest is what you need. So is he saying, okay, rest now because that's going to add 6 years onto my life instead of taking 6 years off? Sometimes it could be that, the thing that I'm worrying about isn't all that important. And, 5-10 years down the line, I'm just not going to worry about it at all. So it's more of a reflective tool. I understand that people might think it's a bit morbid to think about yourself when you're on your deathbed, but ultimately we get one shot at life, and if you're not trying to turn up every day and give 100% in whatever way that looks like, then it just, to me anyway, it feels like a wastage. I know there are people that are very happy just sitting back and taking life at their own pace. That's not me. I want to get stuff done. I want to achieve things, and having that avatar hold me accountable. Again, it comes back to the whole showing up for yourself, because ultimately at that point I'm not looking at anyone else in my life, because I don't care what they think of me when I'm 80. I'm looking at myself. Am I going to be happy with what I did today?
Yeah, I don't think that's morbid necessarily. I think it's a really good tool, and I do something similar. But I know some people do find it a little bit of an uncomfortable concept or image. I was a little bit more abrupt with my version. When I taught productivity for writers a few years ago, I said to people, if you were hit by a tram tomorrow, how would the people you love feel? Would they be proud that you did everything you could to achieve your goals, or would they feel like you'd wasted your life? And I use trams because there are a lot of trams in Nottingham. That's why. So it's kind of a local image that would stick in someone's head a lot more.
Yeah.
And people initially, they were quite horrified by it. And then they kind of went, oh, okay, actually, yeah, I get it. But it's getting over that shock factor of the image in the first place.
But I find that fascinating as well, because there is a real, we can go deep into this, or we can up. There's a real sort of comfort that people have, a real reassurance that tomorrow is guaranteed.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
It's just not like, I've known, I've had friends of mine who have, died young. I've had like family members that have gone for various different circumstances. And most of the time their death was a shock in some way. Like it was something that hit them suddenly, or, it was an accident. So I think for the fact that people are shocked at that image says a lot about how we generally perceive life. Like we just expect that, we're going to have 2.4 kids. We're going to make it up to the age of, 80, whatever the average is. I think 84 maybe isn't the male average at this point.
Yeah, it's mid-80s, I think.
Yeah. And so people then get very comfortable, and you expect tomorrow to come, so you don't try as hard, or you think like, oh, I'll try doing this tomorrow because that's a guarantee. And for me, I don't want to look back on myself when I am 80 and go, oh, you just wasted all of this time. And again, I'm always conscious when I say this stuff, I don't want to feel like I'm attacking people, because this is definitely how I think, and I understand that's not how everyone thinks. But I also like the immediacy of what you're saying in terms of, what if it does happen tomorrow? Because even right now, I'm looking at ways in which my current work's in progress, I can find some kind of accountability partner to give them to in case I die tomorrow. And then at least the things that I've done can either be finished or put out or something. Because nothing is guaranteed. But I think, if anything, that's a real, again, it's not morbid. It's very, very positive to think okay, how can I make the most of today? Because then I'll be grateful on my deathbed.
Yeah, I think it does depend on your perspective as to whether or not you see it as being morbid or as being positive and uplifting. I know I probably, even when I mentioned the tram thing initially, I probably saw it as a little bit morbid, but I am much more of a positive person than I was a few years ago. And I do see it as challenging myself and finding opportunities to grow. And in the diary that I track things in, it's like, what are the top 5 things you've achieved today? And there are some weeks where I do struggle to fill it in. And then I think back and what the fuck have I done this week? When you have those weeks, then you kind of have to reevaluate and go, okay, how can I make next week better than last week and get closer to those end goals?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a massive change straight away. I think this is one thing that people also struggle with, is that you go from, okay, maybe I'm tired, sort of sitting on the sofa and, doing whatever you do in the evening all day. I'm just going to jump in and start doing all these things. And I think that's just as damaging as staying in the spot that you're in. But you really need to take incremental, slow movements in the right direction. And it's a thing that I got from Kevin Hart in I think it was a book or something he was interviewed on. Just try and be better than you were yesterday. And that, if you phrase it in that way, it doesn't have to be significantly marked. It doesn't have to be double as good as you were yesterday, because then that's a big leap. It's just whatever you've done yesterday, see if you can be a bit better than that today, and just build up those incremental changes. And then if you have a day in which, you have to rest or something goes wrong, you take a couple of steps back, just start again and just build it up. And really that's just the steadiest routes to trying to be your best self. I hate that phrase, but yeah.
But it's the most appropriate, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. How can I be my best me?
Yeah. And also remember that the best you now is going to be vastly different to a year ago or a year in the future. Yeah, none of us know what is going to happen in the future, but as long as we're working towards something, that's what counts, right?
100%.
Changing tone slightly, depending on how morbid you want to get. Why do you love horror?
I don't know. No, so I've had a lot of. I've been asked this a few times. I've had quite a lot of time to think about this, and I think I'm still trying to find what the most accurate answer is. I mean, there's lots of different ways to come at it. Number one, I read a couple of horror books when I was a teen, and the language, the prose, everything about it was beautiful. And I think that there's a real challenge with horror in finding beautiful prose to describe morbid things. And so you got people like Clive Barker, obviously Stephen King's kind of a given, Ray Bradbury, all these people that would write really beautiful prose over such sort of macabre subject matter. And I think just an exposure to sort of real adult prose, or my exposure to real adult prose, came from horror. So there's a real sort of just love there for it. And then when it comes to my life, I would argue that I've had a pretty uneventful childhood. Like it's very, I haven't luckily suffered from any sort of like trauma or anything. And so there's a curiosity that comes with exploring the darker side of life and looking at the taboos and, you know, things that people typically don't talk about. Like we've touched quite a lot on death today, and that's a conversation that a lot of people are quite uncomfortable having. And so when it comes to my horror, or my particular brand of horror, I tend to write a lot about scenarios in which people, or a person or a group of people, are stripped back away from any artificiality of what life is. So like no cell phones, no amenities. Just I really like scenarios when people are sort of trapped and all that's left is for them to be what is fundamentally human. And, you know, whichever direction that goes, normally horribly, it's quite fun to play with that, which is, I think, also why I like going into post-apocalyptic, because you reinvent the world from the ground up. Like some have technology, some don't, and it's really sort of, it's about the relationships, and it's about people's mindsets and how they get over these sort of situations. So I think a lot of it is just playfulness, curiosity. As I say, the prose was always something that I absolutely loved just from the start. And there is some really, really fantastic written prose in horror that I think people miss out on, but then I understand why some people don't want to touch into the realm of monsters and death and the horrible stuff.
Yeah, I only really got into horror a couple of years ago. I can remember, like, I don't know, probably 7 years ago, watching The Woman in Black, absolutely terrified of it, nearly had nightmares.
Was that the Daniel Radcliffe one?
It was, yeah. I was a massive Freddy cat. And
Yeah.
it didn't help that when I grew up, the horror genre was literally just people slashing each other to death. It was all things like Saw and Hostel, which didn't appeal to me. I don't want to watch people beat the shit out of each other. But then one Halloween a couple of years ago, my boyfriend put The Conjuring on.
Okay.
And I didn't pay a lot of attention initially, but then because at the heart of The Conjuring, it's about family, it caught my attention because that's what I connect with. It's the characters. It's not the plot for me, although the plot obviously enhances it. It was the fact that it is about this couple and then this family being haunted. And so that just, it's like something switched in my brain. And then also we watched The Haunting of Hill House and The Babadook, and they're both metaphors. And when I discovered that, my mind was blown, because I'm like, these are the most incredible metaphors. I don't want to spoil the ending for The Babadook for anyone who hasn't seen it, but it's brilliant. It's a genius. Like, I just thought it was so clever. I'm really trying not to say what it is. And I know that the director had to fight for that ending because it was seen as unsatisfying compared to your typical Hollywood film.
Interesting.
Have you seen it?
I haven't. No, to be fair, I'm kind of similar in that sense of I am much more drawn to written horror than I am to film horror.
Yeah.
There's quite a few I've seen. Like, what was one that Midsummer I saw a couple of years ago was really, really well done. But I was never appealed by like slasher, just blood, just anything. It has to have some kind of semblance of a story in there for me.
Yeah,
like I don't just do splatter gore.
No. I really struggled with that, and my boyfriend quite likes it, and he kept trying to say, "Oh, you'd like Saw because it's got this story in it, and it's got the guy from Princess Bride in." I'm like, I don't want to watch people get tortured. Like, I just don't. I don't.
That's
care.
the point
You
on
can tell me
horror,
the
is it?
entire story. I'm not going to watch it.
Yeah, it's the same as any other genre. There are different flavors. There are different types of horror, and I think that conventionally most people tend to hear horror and see like Freddy versus Jason and Saw and anything that like just slashes and kills everyone. Obviously, most people die in horror, but there is a new wave of what they're calling elevated horror, which I'm not really sure where I sit on that as a thing, but it's much more sort of almost psychological suspense, like you say, more grounded in people and relationships. I can't remember the name of the film. It might come to me at some point, but yeah, there are some really good films coming out that are lots more explorative of psychological horror, which I quite like.
Yeah, I do as well. I actually analysed horror as part of my media A level.
Nice.
That 18-year-old me did not want to watch horror films. But the funny thing was, neither did our teacher. So she'd skip forward to the significant parts of the film because she'd seen it like a dozen times when teaching it. So she'd just explain the important bits and then skip to the next bit. So we never really had to watch it, and we still did well.
Oh, fair. And then someone dies there, and it's
yeah, exactly. And we watched the really old school horror, like Nosferatu, like Psycho, like there was another one I've forgotten. Jaws. Jaws was classed as horror when it came out, but how many people would necessarily class Jaws as horror now?
Well, yeah, because a lot of people's expectations of just the ratings of things has changed massively. Like some things that are coming out now would definitely have been 18s years ago and are now 12s.
Yeah, people are a lot more immune. It does, yeah. It's like, obviously a bunch of 18-year-olds in a room watching an old horror film is already going to be a bit immature, but a lot of people in my class were laughing through Nosferatu because it just didn't look scary. And the prosthetics and stuff were just so obvious. You know, we've got much higher expectations, and unfortunately I think because of things like social media and the news and film constantly trying to push expectations, we are a bit more immune. Like a study a few years ago showed there's a lot more bloodshed in films now than there were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And people still don't bat an eyelid.
Yeah, and we can go onto YouTube and watch people get beheaded now. Like it's the accessibility towards taboo has changed massively.
It has, yeah. But then I think there's still a bit of judgment there when it comes to certain genres, particularly the more niche ones, like horror. So why do you think some people kind of judge or look down on genres like horror?
I think it's like anything. I think it's just a misunderstanding of what you're going to expect, because you think horror and, like I say, you just see blood being splattered like across a screen. But so many of the better horror stories that I've read, and again, I'm putting back mostly to fiction and novels because that is where kind of like my love lives. You can't have those horrible moments without investing in the real relationships of the characters. So the stories that you read, the characters and their relationships are so exquisitely written that you actually care for them. And I've said this on a previous podcast I was on, but I still find that although I know that in horror, most people tend not to make it because, you know, it's horror and lots of people do die. Unfortunately, that is a trope that exists. I still will read books and root for things to be a happy ending. There's a book by Christopher Golden called Ararat, and I was reading that, and again, I won't give too many spoilers away, but there was a part on that where these characters at the end were walking down this mountain, and I was rooting for them to make it, and things happened, and it wasn't, and it's bizarre because by this point I've read, you know, hundreds of horror books. I've written enough of them myself that you think that you wouldn't be fooled by that, but you are. And yeah, I think mostly it's a misunderstanding. It's a reflection of other people's limits when it comes to their willingness to play in the darker side. And I get this a lot because I like to think I'm a pretty nice guy. But then when I tell people I write horror, the first thing they say is, what, you? Because I think you expect like the metalhead with the beard and the scars and like all of that kind of stuff. But most of the horror writers that I've met are some of the nicest people I've met in my life. And that's not to say some of them haven't been through, you know, tragedy that has fueled their horror, but I think having an outlet to put that stuff out and not have to worry about it or to process it or to think about it or to attack it in some way is a therapy in itself. And a lot of people just assume that, you know, you're screwed in the head if you can create these horrible scenarios. But I also think we all have, you know, the ability to create horrible scenarios. Like, I can't walk over like the side of the pavement of a bridge without thinking of like jumping in and wondering what will happen if that happened. Or if I'm driving along the motorway, some voice in my head's always like, just quickly touch it to the left and just ram off this verge. Like everyone has those thoughts where it's like stuff that you think, oh, I shouldn't think, because we're all curious by what comes next. But I think some of us embrace that more than others because of, I don't know, it could be a multitude of reasons, but I think, mostly it boils down to people's own parameters when it comes to what they're willing to explore, and just that sort of gap in understanding each other.
Yeah, I think for me, what I've come to realize about horror, and I do watch it more than I read it, just because I watch film and TV more than I read in general anyway. I know I shouldn't say that as an author, but I do.
I think you can. I think you're allowed.
I've actually had people say, why are you teaching storytelling using a film? Because a film is 90 minutes and a book is about 10 hours, which is more common. But for me, it boils down to the darker side of humanity and forcing us to face that, whether it is our fears of life after death, or of driving off a bridge, or of someone slaughtering us wearing a crazy mask. It forces us to face those deep, dark fears. And actually, some of the most chill people I know are horror fans. Like my boyfriend, he pretty much exclusively watches and reads horror and comic book stuff, and he is the single most laid back person you will ever meet.
You just don't have to worry about it, because on some level you're processing that stuff anyway. So if anything, like I said this in a recent interview, but I think it came across more morbid than I meant, but like it prepares you, because life isn't all sunshine and rainbows, and sometimes bad things happen. And so for me, as someone who lived a childhood that was relatively event-free in terms of, bad stuff, like there's a preparedness now in me. Like I've explored, and obviously like I have limits. There are certain things that I won't explore in my book. So I don't do a lot in terms of like sexual horror, because that's just an arena I don't want to go into. But I've had chances to process and to explore, what characters might do and what different people might do. And if you go into it really sort of psychologically and do some psychoanalytics, I'm sure that there are enough characters in my book that are reflective of people in my real life that maybe I've been concerned about their behavior and subconsciously put them into my book and processed it. But it does breed a certain preparedness for when those darker times do come. So you do tend to be a bit more laid back.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have been able to write The Ghost Skull had my nan not passed away a couple of years ago, because I don't know why, that just opened me up to it. I don't believe in ghosts. Like all my readers, when I asked them, said they do pretty much. I genuinely don't, but I just feel like, writing about these things in the realm of fantasy or horror, because my stuff's more fantasy than horror, it just, like you say, it allows me to face those things and raise those questions. And it's not even just the life after death stuff. There's a lot of psychological manipulation that's going to happen in later books, and I know that's a fear a lot of people face. I'm not saying I'm afraid my boyfriend's going to psychologically manipulate me. He's not.
Always got to be careful.
Well, we've been together 12 years, so if he was going to do it at some point, it'd probably be long before now.
Yeah.
But I do think it's quite a good coping mechanism that some people haven't even considered, because they're afraid to tap into that really dark part of their mind, as if it makes them more twisted or more angry or more whatever. Yeah,
I don't really, because the first horror books I actually ever read were the Goosebumps series. R.L. Stine had to be. I think that's where most people sort of around our generation just tended to launch from. But it was really jumping into Stephen King. And for me, when I first started writing, because originally I started out wanting to write a fantasy series, and first ever book, probably 100,000 words, first book of a trilogy. That's definitely a good place to start when you've never written a novel before. And I really struggled with it, and I got sort of 3 or 4 chapters in each time, stopped, went back, and then I read Stephen King's got a short story collection called Everything's Eventual, and just the art form of his telling in short stories and the different directions and the ways that he took these stories just really sort of inspired me to tap into that horror vein. And that's where the first novella I wrote, Sins of Smoke, came from, was just this real wanting to play with some of the ideas that I got from that book. And because it was a novella and it was smaller, it meant it was easier to complete as a first project. And then I really, really enjoyed writing the horror in there, and it just kind of went on.
I don't know about you, but I certainly think if you struggle to finish things, short stories and novellas can be quite a good place to go to, because they're just less intimidating and there are less threads to manage.
Yeah, 100%. That's definitely advice I've given to people, just to cleanse the palette between projects, or if you're stuck on a project, quickly finish a short story or the reader magnet, because they're always short. But they're definitely good to just wrap up, because you don't get a big sense of achievement, but you definitely get a big sense of achievement when you finish the book, but it takes months to do, often, depending on what type of writer you are. And so, yeah, having those smaller wins and having something that you can hold up and be like, yeah, this is done, is definitely useful for keeping that momentum and taking those steps forward.
Yeah, and it builds your confidence then, so you feel more able to write something a little bit longer and more capable as a storyteller, and you've learned something, because I think a lot of the learning comes from actually finishing something rather than constant stop and starting or constantly tinkering the same project.
I'd argue all the learning comes from finishing.
Yeah, I can see that. See that. I have had people not believe me until they finished a book, and then they suddenly have an epiphany and go, "You're right." I'm like,
Because they don't want to accept that you're right, because that means they have to finish the book.
Yeah, and obviously it takes them years to finish the book, so they don't know until that's actually out for sale on Amazon and Apple and wherever else.
But yeah, like coming back to the car analogy, you can't say that you know how to build a car or that you tried until you've actually done it.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest curse I see in writers is people that it's the spin the wheel thing. So they'll write chapters 1 through 5, and then they'll suddenly realize that they want to change chapter 1. So they'll change chapter 1, which then changes chapter 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they write chapter 6, which then alters what they originally did. So they go back to chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then they write 7, and they're like, oh no. And then another idea will come, and they'll go, crap. And they'll start again. And to everyone I ever encounter, my entire advice is just keep going.
Yeah.
If you've got a cool idea, note it down for the second draft. Just finish the first draft.
Yeah, because that is the hardest part of the entire process, is finishing that draft. And I know, like, even now when I've done 15 books, I still feel a sense of relief then when that first draft is done.
Yeah,
it's
that's heavy lifting.
Hand breathe. It was definitely the heavy lifting last week, because I wrote 4 really intense scenes in 2 days. Ooh. And then my friends were like, no wonder you feel like shit. I'm like, can I get some cake, please?
Cake and wine.
yeah, pretty much was it. I did make a very nice cake, actually. Okay,
nice.
So tying back into horror then, what authors would you recommend readers should check out if they want to get into horror? Like me, for example.
So number 1 straight away comes into my head, Nick Cutter. Nick Cutter is the pen name of, I want to say, Craig Davidson. I'm pretty sure that's right. But he has a book called The Troop, which is absolutely phenomenal, especially when it comes to sensory horror. So it's one of those books where you hear, you feel, you taste, you smell, like it's beautiful.
Wow.
And he's got a few others as well that are quite good, Little Heaven and The Deep. And then you have people like Clive Barker. If you want to go sort of a bit more classic, Clive Barker's prose is just wonderful. A little sort of more dated now compared to some contemporary horror, but it's very, very good. His books of blood are fantastic for sort of short stories and just getting a taste of who he is. Adam Neville wrote The Ritual, which came out as a horror film, I want to say 2013 maybe, but the book is sensational. It's one of those ones that there's like a chapter in there that I come back to every year or so and just reread because it's just exquisitely delivered. Keelan Patrick Burke, who is big on sort of the indie author scene, he's big on the Bookstagram community, and he writes fantastic stuff. He's got a book called Sour Candy, which I highly recommend. It's a novella. Jennifer Ann Gordon, who won the Kindle's Best Horror 2020 last year. The Beautiful, Silent and Frightening, that book's called. Jack Ketchum, again, classic horror. Richard Lehman, going back more into the 80s, very dated, but fantastic writing. Obviously, Stephen King has been mentioned. Find his horror books as opposed to, because he's got a lot of thrillers and stuff now. Like, try and find things like Pet Sematary or my mind's gone blank. What was his vampire one?
Salem's Lot.
They're good.
Yeah, I really like that one. I analysed that one at uni.
Yeah, Cujo is one of my favourites of his. Cujo is fantastic.
I don't know if I could read that with it being a dog.
Yeah, but you can do he does so much with such a restricted environment, and yeah, it's just really well done. But yeah, there are loads of Paul Tremblay, Josh Malerman has got, obviously Bird Box kind of leaks into horror. There's loads I could keep going with.
I think we should stop there in case we bombard people in the day. And they're like, actually, where do I start from this list? So talking about you and books then, what's one book that changed your life?
I think the book that, because there have been lots of books that have altered the way I think or sort of changed trajectory of my life, but I think the biggest one was I read a book when I was 17 called Fuck It by John C. Parkin. And the principle behind that book is it's teaching essentially sort of Buddhist philosophy, but through a lens of contemporary, like Western language. So it's the notion of, in Buddhism, it's the notion of letting go. So obviously when you meditate, you try and like let go of your anxieties, the different things that you're thinking, all the different thoughts. But in modern day, a lot of us just say like, fuck it. So when you get to a point where like, oh my God, how am I going to like deal with this person? I don't know if I'm going to be able to like get to the party on time or whatever. Most people will just go, fuck it, it doesn't matter. And in saying that, it's that releasing of tension and whatever that worry is. And the book's really good because it's phased in different chapters that address different parts of your life. So relationships, food, money, and you can literally flick open this book at any point and it will kind of like guide you through releasing worry about that. And it just kind of took a lot of the, I guess, quote, importance off of a lot of things that I was worrying about that didn't really need to be worried about when you were 17.
I get that. There's always something you're worrying about in the back of your mind, even if you don't consciously realize that you are worrying about it.
Mm-hmm. And again, just saying
like, something like that in your arsenal.
Yeah, and just saying fuck it, and just feeling yourself go, oh, now I'm not worried anymore.
Yeah, it is a nice sense of relief when you just let go.
Mm-hmm.
So where can readers go to find out more about you?
Yeah, so everything I'm doing can be found at www.danielwilcocks.com, and it's Wilcocks, which is Willcocks, which is probably one of the longer ways of spelling it. But yeah, you can find my books on there, you can find my coaching, you can find the podcast that I've been involved with, just anything you want over on there, or just message me and say hi.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great chat.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
Did you find this episode enlightening? Don't forget to hit that shiny, shiny subscribe button.
Or if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button. It helps other writers to find us and it lets us know what type of content you want more of.
And don't forget, you can support The Writer's Mindset over on Patreon for as little as your favorite coffee a month.
Join our growing gang of writers and get early access to episodes, bonus content, and writing workshops.
Visit patreon.com/writersmindset to find out more.
See you next time.
Keep writing.